Well, good afternoon, and you're joining me, Sophie Edwards, Senior Reporter with Devex, live from GESF, the Global Education Skills Forum here in Dubai. And I'm delighted to be joined by Yasmine Sherif, who's the Director of Education Cannot Wait, which is a global fund for education in emergencies and protracted crises. So thank you very much for joining us, Yasmine.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, maybe just catch us up a little bit with where ACW is. You've been going for nearly 2 years now. Tell us what's been happening in that time.
Well, over the past nearly 2 years, today Education Cannot Wait is present with investments in 19 countries affected by natural disasters, armed conflict, or hosting large refugee populations. We have a target of mobilizing $1.8 billion by 2021. We are close to $350 million today, and it keeps coming. So we do see a very positive trend. And we are working with close to 40 partners,
Wow.
international UN agencies, enormous group of civil society and NGOs, local NGOs and stakeholders, and have wonderful partnerships with all host governments in countries where we invest. Yeah.
And you're hosting a replenishment this year, is that right?
Yes, I mean we are a very cost-effective and lean fund. So I think that the grand total of the positions that we have is 27, and then we have a few consultants. So with that capacity, you can't organize big replenishments events, because you have to also deliver results on the ground. But we are going to have some form of event to allow our strategic donor partners to receive the publicity and make their calls that they deserve through an event at an opportunity this year during the UN General Assembly, where the world can see the investments that they make in support of 75 million children and youth.
So that's later this year in New York?
Yes.
Okay. And actually, so interestingly, we were having a discussion earlier about how there are sort of a number of new financing facilities and funds in the education sector sort of either being set up or have been set up, which is great because education has sort of been fairly neglected compared with other sectors historically. But is that creating some problems as well? Is there sort of competition maybe among some sort of donors and actors, etc.? And how can we sort of, if that is an issue, how do we get through that? What do you see?
Well, a few points on that. First of all, when it comes to fragmentation, well, you can use different, terminology. You can also speak about diversity, because no one can do it alone. We know this. This is the standard phrase for anyone that is in the business of service. No one can do it alone. It's not a single-minded or unilateral effort. And we also know that abnormal problems requires extraordinary solutions. So you need many different entry points and ways of doing things in order to reach every single child or youth. There was a study that came out of the University of Zurich, I think in 2017, that spoke about fragmentation. Is it a problem, or is it actually an advantage? And the conclusion was that when it comes to economic empowerment, fragmentation can have severe implications. But when it comes to fragmentation in health sector or education sector, it's actually proven to help these two sectors to attract more funding and optimize more collective efforts. So it depends how you look at it. We also have a big UN reform right now where all our donors that invest in this so-called fragmentation, but invest in the different aspects on education, they are investing in this UN development reform and the humanitarian reform that took place a few years ago, but just the development reform. So that is to bring an end to fragmentation. And that is the multilateral system that we have today, and that encompasses 193 member states, all civil society, the whole humanitarian coordination mechanisms in country are exceptionally keen on having the civil society and the localization agenda in place, but is able to also bring in the development sector, and that's what the whole humanitarian development nexus is about. So that is the kind of reform that all donors are investing in. And if they want to avoid fragmentation, investing in that reform and invest in actors who are aligning themselves with that reform. Then we will mitigate risk for fragmentation. But you cannot invest millions of dollars in a UN reform and then do something different elsewhere and expect to bring a coherent system together. So that's another side to it. And thirdly, decision at the point of delivery, coordination at the point of delivery. While it might appear that this diversity is fragmented at global level, once you go in country where the context-specific needs are, you have one government, or you have maybe the jure and de facto government, different parties, you have a civil society, you have communities, but you have one coordination in the country, that's where you bring it all together. You and I cannot sit in Dubai or in New York and try to bring together the needs and the systems and the alignments that need to be made in, for instance, Yemen.
Yeah.
It has to take place in country or Central African Republic. So as long as you have a strong, coherent in-country coordination system that will come with the UN reform and the humanitarian coordination mechanism, then the fragmentation will turn into collective outcomes, which will lead to learning outcomes.
Yeah. Do you think that we're missing the point a bit, that there is sort of too much conferencing, too much discussions at high levels at places like this, and that there's sort of somehow we've lost sight of the on the ground and the outcomes and the coordination?
Well, I mean, having discussions are important, and discussing them at any level, whether it's local or global. We all should stay engaged. We want everyone to be involved, but too much of it tend to take away time, focus, the mindset you need to stay the course to deliver the actual results on the ground. Sometimes when you sit in these meetings and conferences, and especially when you hear jargon or you see competitive streaks around the table, you worry, because at the end of the day we are here for the children and the young. For as far as Education Cannot Wait is concerned, and I will only speak for Education Cannot Wait, because only we can define what we are doing. For us, we are obsessed, absolutely obsessed, not only passionate, but we are obsessed about the 75 million children and youth that are out there. And if we cannot justify to them where we are spending all our time in headquarters and conferences arguing about who shall do what, I think we are not delivering as a result. I think we should all go home in shame and bend our heads. They are the ones that matter, and we are obliged to them. And of course also to the host governments who are willing to be empowered and supported to deliver basic services such as education. Yeah. But yes, too much talking at headquarters is not, and I don't think that's rocket science. I think people who have been in the business of service for all their life, as many have, I think they came to that enlightenment many years ago. It's often when you get new players who haven't perhaps lived in the field, they don't know what it means to live in abject suffering, poverty, and abnormal suffering, and when you have that disconnect, you have the luxury to focus on things that don't really matter to these children.
And maybe a final question. Obviously, technology is a big focus of the Vaki Foundations and GESF. We see a lot of that on display here. Is there anything that you've seen or that you've heard about that's particularly exciting for you in the work that you support that could make a difference?
In terms of technology, I mean, we are partnering with the Global Business Coalition for Education that have this React database with hundreds of private sector partners, and through them we were connected to HP, and I was just in Texas last week, where we met, of course, with HP, and hundreds of companies are involved in technology, but besides that we are actually implementing on the ground already in Uganda, joined up within our broader multi-year refugee response and host community response plan technology, where they bring in all the hardware, working closely with the government and all partners on the ground to deliver high quality education and training the teachers, the students, the families of the value of education and technology in education, and which brings them to a whole new way of quality learning that is fit for today's world and will provide them with the skills that make them employable in the future.
Okay, and what sort of technology is it? Is it online learning? Or?
Yeah, they're the computers, and then it's the software, and then the virtual learning, which is extremely exciting.
Yeah.
You know, even as a grown-up, I want to benefit from this. It's so exciting.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, no, thank you very much. That was very interesting, Yasmine. And any sort of closing thoughts as we wrap up our coverage of GESF?
Well, I mean, I think your coverage overall is great, and I follow most that Devex publishes. And I think you play a critically important role in also maybe to detangle the competition and help us all stay focused on what really matters. So kudos to Devex, and thank you for having me here for the second time, I think, in 1 year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yasmine.